Okay. So we are now recording the lecture, and I plan on going through some of the stuff that's in the Unit 3 study outline. That is, you guys have the two study outlines that have been posted in the two Unit 3 folders. So I will go through those. Before I do that, I just want to show you what I have done like already available to you, which is why I won't be going through these sections in the study outline. So this is, I've gone to like the web page that I've created in the first folder for Unit 3, and it starts with a biochemistry review. And you might be wondering, why are we doing chemistry when this is an anatomy and physiology course? But there is an important reason, because when we talk about the digestive system, and then in the next unit, we'll be talking about metabolism, which kind of follows digestion. It is really important to understand the molecules that we're talking about. So these are things like carbohydrates and proteins and lipids, nucleic acids. And you probably, hopefully, learned about these substances a little bit in A&P 1, and if you took a chemistry course. But this is just a review of some of that stuff, just to make sure that we're all on the same page in case you didn't have that information in a prior course. So mainly this focuses on the types of organic molecules, chemical reactions, and it's these organic molecules that are what we are ingesting. So the main foods that you're eating are composed of carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, and proteins. So it's important to understand, after we do ingest them and our body is then digesting them, what they get broken down into, like what are their building blocks, what are their basic components. And it's also important to understand chemical reactions, because chemical reactions are happening as your body is breaking down these organic molecules. So you're breaking a large molecule into smaller molecules, and eventually those smaller molecules are being broken up into individual atoms. So it is important to understand like what those things are, what the major chemical reaction types are, just because it relates so directly to the digestive system and digestion. So I just want to show you that you do have definitions for the major organic molecules in here already, which is why I'm not going to be just sitting here, lecturing about this to you, because you already have this here. So you have carbs, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, which are DNA and RNA. And in addition to that, you have a lecture of mine which covers the very first thing in that chemistry review section of the study outline, which is the chemical reactions. And right after that, I get into all of the major types of organic molecules. So I will then go into more details about carbs, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, and I'll discuss ATP. So basically, you're getting, within this lecture and with these definitions I've provided, like the first several pages of your study outline already. So if you haven't looked at this yet, just make sure that you do before next week, so you can for sure use this to fill in that whole chemistry section. And then below is an introduction to the digestive system. So regarding the chemistry stuff, and then I'll be done with that since you have all of this information here. The one thing I do want to talk about just really quickly is what enzymes are, because we're dealing with those in our lab this week, the lipid digestion lab. And also they're hugely important in the digestive system. So enzymes are a type of protein actually, and they're called catalytic proteins. And that just means that they can either trigger or speed up reactions. So enzymes are designed to cause or trigger or just speed up a chemical reaction. And we will learn about many different types of enzymes as we go through the digestive system outline that you have. There are enzymes that are specific to certain substrates, and the term substrate refers to the molecule that the enzyme acts upon. So there are enzymes that are specific to carbohydrates, certain types of carbohydrates. Then there's a different enzyme that will break down certain lipids. Then there's another enzyme that's going to break apart protein. So they are specific for, one type of molecule. You don't have just one single enzyme that's going to break down every single type of organic molecule that you eat. So you do have many different enzymes that are responsible for digesting different types of molecules. Okay. So moving on to this section now. This is your introduction to the digestive system. So if you have your outline on you, printed out, or just opened up on your computer, you can go to that overview of the digestive system section, skip past the chemistry stuff. We're done with that. And this gives you a definition for the major digestive processes that are listed in your outline. So they go pretty much in order, with ingestion first, which is basically just eating that happens at the mouth. And then propulsion, which is the movement of food throughout the digestive tract. You have contractions of the muscle layer of the digestive tract, which are continuously moving food through the digestive tract just in one direction, typically. Then there is mechanical breakdown, which refers to the physical breaking apart of food into smaller pieces. And a lot of that happens through chewing, in the mouth with your teeth. And when you're just chewing up food, it's physically broken down that way. But it also gets physically broken apart as it moves down into the stomach, because you have a lot of churning. You have, again, muscle contractions that are kind of squeezing the food and mixing it up, and at the same time breaking it apart. Then the term digestion actually refers to chemical breakdown. So when food is chemically broken down, that is done by enzymes. So this is going back to all the different types of enzymes that I mentioned a couple minutes ago. You have all different types of enzymes for all the different types of organic molecules that you have in the digestive tract. So in this way, large molecules are broken apart chemically into smaller molecules or atoms. And that is necessary for the next step, which is absorption. So the really large molecules that you initially ingest are too large to be absorbed into the bloodstream. And it is necessary to chemically break them apart into smaller things, like small molecules and atoms, before they can be absorbed. And then finally, defecation, which is basically the last step in the process. Anything that is, a waste or something that can't be digested, that your body can't digest, will be excreted from the body. All right, so you do have definitions provided here for all those terms. If I go into the outline a little bit farther, then we get into the membranes that are associated with the digestive tract. And for that section, you don't really have, I don't think, no, you don't have definitions for these membranes. So I will go through those a little bit with you, and then we'll get into some of the actual digestive organs. So we are just, again, we're at the membranes and histology of the alimentary canal section. And I'm going to go, actually, I'm going to leave the web page for now and share the PowerPoint that has, let me see, that has better pictures of the membranes. Okay. Here we go. All right. And last time when I did the like the slideshow, remember I was having issues with like advancing the slide. So I'm just going to leave it like this and go through this way. So you guys obviously know that the digestive tract is located in the abdominopelvic cavity. There are a lot of organs and structures associated with the digestive tract. So there are several different membranes that are, located in this area in order to do several things to keep these organs connected to each other and to keep them held in their place within this cavity so they're not just kind of floating around freely. The first membrane that is on your list if you're looking at the outline, is the peritoneum. So that is written right here. The peritoneum covers most digestive organs, which are located in the abdominopelvic cavity. So it covers almost all of the digestive organs. And you already have in your outline that it is the largest serous membrane in the body. So there's really two main types of membranes: serous membranes and mucous membranes. Mucous membranes secrete mucus. Serous membranes secrete serous fluid, which is just a very watery fluid that lubricates structures. So this is considered a serous membrane. And there are two layers of the peritoneum. The visceral peritoneum is the inner layer, which covers the surface. It directly covers the surface of most digestive organs. So it is directly covering, it's touching most of the digestive organs. The parietal peritoneum is the outer layer, and it lines the abdominopelvic cavity. So it's all the way up against the abdominopelvic cavity. It is not directly touching the organs. So there is a space between those two layers, because you have the layer directly covering the organs, and then you have a space, and then you have the layer that's all the way up against the abdominopelvic wall. Within that space is serous fluid, because these are serous membranes that secrete that fluid. Okay. So next membrane, let me get there. Here we go. Next membrane is called the mesentery. And the mesentery is a double layer of the peritoneum. So the peritoneum is kind of folded over to create a double layered membrane. And that's what this is. So it's a double layer of the peritoneum that extends from the body wall and connects to digestive organs. So there are a few types of mesenteries. This is just like a type of membrane. And there's several specific ones that we have. But the general function of a mesentery of this type of membrane is to, like I mentioned earlier, to hold organs in their place so they're not just kind of floating around in the abdominal cavity. Also, this membrane contains blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. So it provides a way for blood and lymph to reach digestive organs. And also in one case, one of the mesenteries stores fat. All right. So the next thing we'll look at is the tissue, the layers of tissue that make up the digestive tract, or you're probably seeing there's actually several different names for the digestive tract. So we can call it the digestive tract. We can also call it, like is written here, the alimentary canal. It's the same thing as the digestive tract. And then another term that we can use to refer to it is the gastrointestinal tract, or the GI tract. All of that is referring to the same thing. It's basically just like the tube that goes from your mouth and then esophagus, stomach, intestines, and then it ends at the anus. So it's just the tube that runs through the body. Anywhere that you look at the digestive tract or the alimentary canal, you will see 4 distinct layers of tissue. So we'll go from inner to outer, starting with the innermost layer right here, which is called the mucosa. So the mucosa is the inner lining of the GI tract, and it is called the mucosa because it's a mucous membrane. So for the functions of the mucosa, number 1, secretion of several things: secretion of mucus, of digestive enzymes, and also hormones. Also absorption. So that's absorption of nutrients after digestion. Remember, before digestion happens, nutrient molecules are too large to be absorbed, but after digestion, they can be absorbed. So that happens through this layer. And then also protection against disease, because in the mucosa, do you guys remember from the lymphatic system, we talked about the MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. So it's like clusters of lymphatic tissue that contain a lot of white blood cells for protection. So it's within this layer that you have that MALT, those clumps of lymphoid tissue with white blood cells, and that's for protection. Okay, so after the mucosa layer, then is the submucosa, right outside of it. So the submucosa is, first of all, pretty vascular. So that means it has a lot of blood vessels. It has a large blood supply. And its function is really to just bind the mucosa to the next layer, which is called the muscularis. That's really all it does, is it just attaches the mucosa to the next layer. So that next layer is called the Muscularis Externa. And just like the name indicates, it is a muscle layer. It's composed of actually 2 layers of muscle tissue. There's an inner circular layer that you can see the muscle fibers run in this direction. And then there's an outer layer, which the muscle fibers run in the opposite direction. They go this way. So the function of this layer is that it's responsible for the contractions that occur throughout the digestive tract. The name for those contractions that occur all the way through the digestive tract, and I'm going to put the slide up to show you, the name for that is peristalsis. So if you need spelling, it's right here on this slide. So the term peristalsis refers to the contractions that are continuously happening to move food forward through the digestive tract. So this illustration is kind of showing you how when you have these contractions, it's moving food down lower and lower and lower through the digestive tract. Okay, there is another type of contraction that happens called segmentation. So when this happens, it's a little bit different from peristalsis, because peristalsis is always moving food in one direction. It's moving it forward or down through the digestive tract. But segmentation is when you have contractions like one and then the next and then another, just basically moving food back and forth in one area. So food is not really moving forward or down through the digestive tract. It's just moving back and forth. And that is really to help break the food apart. That happens primarily just in the small intestine, just to kind of mix food up and break it apart. Okay, so that's the job of the muscularis layer. And then finally, the outermost layer that you can see here in the tan color is the serosa. And the serosa is the inner layer of the peritoneum. Remember, we talked about the very first membrane we talked about was the peritoneum. And I said that it directly covers all of the digestive organs. So this is it. This is the serosa is that. It's the visceral peritoneum. So it is that membrane that is directly covering pretty much all of your digestive organs and the digestive tract. Okay. So one thing that's kind of interesting, just moving right down to the next section of your study outline, is the nerves that are associated with the digestive tract. So the GI or digestive tract actually has its own little nervous system. It's called the enteric nervous system. The term or the word root entero refers to intestines. So enteric nervous system is the nervous system that supplies not just the intestines, but all of the digestive tract. So all of the neurons that are part of this little mini nervous system are found in the middle layers that we just talked about. They're found in the submucosa and the muscularis layers. And these neurons control the contractions of the muscle layer of the muscularis. So in your outline, you'll see that there are short reflex arcs and there are long reflex arcs. So let me just explain the difference between the two. The short reflex arcs only involve neurons that are in the enteric nervous system. They don't involve neurons that are outside of this area. So they don't connect to the brain or the spinal cord. It's just the neurons that are right here in the digestive tract. And they respond to stimuli within the digestive tract. So these stimuli would include things like stretching of the digestive tract or chemical changes in the digestive tract. And when I say a chemical change, that could be something like a change in pH. So if the pH suddenly changes within the digestive tract, that would be detected. And then effectors, so that refers to things that would react and respond to these changes or stimuli. So effectors would be smooth muscle, the smooth muscle in the muscularis layer, or glands. Okay, so, and that's actually shown right here on the diagram, the types of effectors that would respond to those stimuli. Okay, so the difference between the short reflex arcs and the long reflex arcs is that the long reflex arcs are controlled by your central nervous system. So that's the brain and spinal cord. So unlike the short reflex arcs, we're not just sticking to the digestive tract itself. This includes the central nervous system. So it's controlled by, most often, the brain, could be the spinal cord though too. And these are initiated by stimuli that are either inside or outside of the digestive tract. And if you guys remember from A&P1, how we have sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the nervous system, they are like subdivisions of the motor division of the nervous system. They would do two different things. So if the parasympathetic nervous system is responding, it would increase digestive activity. If the sympathetic division or sympathetic nervous system is responding, it would do the exact opposite, and it would inhibit digestive activity. Okay, so now we can get into some of the actual structures of the digestive tract. I don't want to take a ton of time to go through anatomy, because this is all stuff that's very simple to get from your book or from the information that I've provided on the web pages that I've created. But I'll go through a couple of things here. So we'll start with the mouth, and basically we're starting to go through all the parts of the digestive tract, from the beginning to the end. And then after that, we'll get to the accessory organs and accessory structures. And that just means that they're not part of the digestive tract. And so food does not actually enter those organs or structures, but they do participate in digestion in some way. They are involved with the digestive activities in some way. So food is only moving through the digestive tract. It doesn't ever go into any of the accessory structures, which would be things like the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder. All right, so we'll start with the mouth, which is where ingestion occurs. Lips are pretty obvious. I think you guys know what those are. You can see them right here. They just surround the opening of the mouth. I will point out the labial frenulum. There's one on the top and one on the bottom. This is a fold of mucous membrane. If you look really closely, you can see it here and here. And it attaches the lip to the gum. And then the term gingivae refers to the gums. And there are two spaces that are associated with the mouth. The main one is the oral cavity. So that is this entire space within the mouth that's behind the teeth. And that is much larger than the other one, which is called the vestibule. The vestibule is the small space here, which is located outside of the teeth and gums, but within the lips. So it's a little bit hard to explain, but it's this space out here. So it's under the lip, but it's outside of the teeth and the gums. So it's here, and same thing on the bottom. It's this space here. Okay, so those are the spaces found within the mouth. Let's see, we've already talked about the palate when we did the respiratory system. You can see it a little bit better from the side. You guys remember that you have hard palate, which is the anterior portion made of bone, and the soft palate, which is the posterior portion made of muscle. One thing that I didn't talk about, I don't think, with the respiratory system is the uvula. The uvula is all the way at the bottom of the soft palate. It is a muscular process that hangs off of the soft palate. So it hangs down from the soft palate. And one thing that you do have written in your outline is the function of the soft palate and the uvula. So remember, we talked about the epiglottis in a lot of detail because it's very important. Remember, the epiglottis has the important function of closing and covering this opening here called the glottis. So when you are swallowing food or liquid, it covers up the glottis, which is the opening into the airways. But you also need to close off this opening that leads into the nasal cavity, the nasopharynx and the nasal cavity during swallowing as well. Because not only do you not want food or liquids to go into your larynx and trachea, but also you don't want them going up into your nasal cavity. So back to the function of the soft palate and the uvula during swallowing, these are going to raise up. And actually, I think I have a picture. All right, so it's pretty kind of a small picture, but if you look during this phase of swallowing, you see how the soft palate and the uvula are in this picture hanging down. So there is an opening into the nasal cavity, but here they have raised up a little bit to close off that opening. So basically that is just to prevent food or liquids from entering the nasal cavity or the nasopharynx during swallowing. All right, one other thing that I'll talk about with the mouth, because that, again, I don't want to spend too much time on anatomy since it's like the easy part. But I'll do the salivary glands because there are 3 pairs of salivary glands located in the mouth. They all secrete saliva, and basically when they secrete saliva, it goes into a duct. You guys can see an example of one of the ducts here. And then the duct carries saliva into the oral cavity. So first of all, the parotid glands are the largest. They're located in front of each ear. The submandibular glands are down here. They're located under the angle of the mandible, which is the jaw, the lower jaw. And then the sublingual glands are right here. These are located under the tongue. They are the smallest ones. And then just a little bit about saliva. It is mostly water, and the other like 1% that's not water is solutes, and that would be things like ions and enzymes. There is one enzyme found in saliva. It is in bold in your outline. It's called salivary amylase, and that initiates the breakdown of polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are the largest carbohydrates And the most common one that we ingest is starch. Okay, and then one other thing to fill in that's not filled in for you on the outline regarding saliva is its pH. The pH of saliva is just a little bit acidic. It's like a 6.5 about. So remember, 7 on the pH scale is neutral. So this is at a 6.5, just very slightly acidic. All right, maybe I'll do teeth.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How can we have saliva that's acidic? Like, it doesn't affect us.
What do you mean? So it actually is, we have acidic parts. Basically, our diet is acidic. So acidity doesn't really affect us too much because, I mean, if I don't know what you're referring to, but maybe if you mean like, would it make our blood acidic? Because we talked about having, we have that very specific range for the pH of blood. And if that's what you're referring to, remember we have multiple buffer systems in blood to prevent changes in blood's pH, even if we are adding acids or adding bases to blood. Those buffer systems are going to really prevent blood from being affected. Okay. So the teeth, which are located in the mouth, are found in like sockets that are in the gingiva, in your gums. And they're classified based on their size and shape and function. And you can see the 4 main classifications here. The incisors are the 4 anterior teeth in the front, and they're used mainly for cutting. So like biting food, cutting it. And the next type are the canines. These are like the pointy teeth. And these are next to the incisors. So they're the sharp pointed teeth next to the incisors. And they're used for tearing. Next classification are the premolars, and we'll group those together with the molars because they are similar. These are the wide teeth in the back of the mouth used for grinding and crushing food. Okay. And one more thing regarding the teeth. As you probably are aware, you initially start out with the baby teeth, which are technically referred to as deciduous teeth. So these are 20 teeth. There are 20 deciduous or baby teeth that you will initially have. Usually by the age of 2 or a little bit over, you'll have all of the baby teeth. And when I give you the dental formula, this is referring to the number of each type of tooth on just one side of the mouth. So for example, the deciduous teeth have a dental formula of 2102. So this is going through the types of teeth in order, letting you know how many there are on just one side. The other side will be identical to that, and the top and the bottom will be identical, unless obviously a tooth has been lost or extracted for some reason. So for the baby teeth, if we look at the dental formula 2102, that means that there are 2 incisors. The third one is the canine tooth. So there's 1 canine. The next number is 0. So that means there are 0 premolars. And then the last number is 2. So that means there are 2 molars. And those are the 2 teeth all the way in the back. So you have that same number on the other side and the exact same number on both sides on the bottom. For the adult teeth, these are, there are 32 teeth. So you go from having 20 deciduous teeth to 32 adult teeth. The dental formula for adult teeth is 2, 1, 2, 3. So that means on one side, there would be 2 incisors, 1 canine, and that's actually the same as the baby teeth, 2 incisors, 1 canine. But then here's what's different. There are 2 premolars, 1 here, 1 here. Oops, sorry, 1 here and 1 here, and then 3 molars, 1, 2, 3, the last 3 teeth. So that is what the dental formula tells you. The next section is just the substances that teeth are made out of, and that is directly from the book. I don't want to waste a whole lot of time going through that so that I can get to some stuff that maybe is not in the book or at least harder to find. Let me go here. So digestive processes that occur in the mouth. Remember, initially we went through all of the processes involved with digestion. I will have this list in your PowerPoint for every section of the digestive tract so that you can see exactly what is happening and where. So in the mouth, you have ingestion, and this is actually the only place where ingestion occurs. You have propulsion of food, that's moving food forward. In the mouth, this happens through deglutition. That is a fancy word for swallowing. That means swallowing. You have mechanical breakdown of food. That happens primarily through mastication. And that's a kind of a fancy word for chewing. So by using your teeth and chewing up food, that is the primary way that we are physically breaking it apart. We do have a little bit of digestion here because remember, digestion is performed by enzymes, and there is an enzyme that is secreted in saliva. It's the salivary amylase. So that does begin a little bit in the mouth. There is no absorption and there is no defecation, thank goodness, that happens in the mouth. Okay, so next section of the digestive tract is the pharynx. So the nasopharynx is not part of the digestive tract, but food and liquids enter the mouth. They enter through the oral cavity, so then they will move into the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx before they get down into the esophagus. So we've already discussed the divisions of the pharynx with respiratory system. I don't need to do that again with you, but now we get into the esophagus. Muscular tube that connects the pharynx to the stomach. And basically at the top and the bottom of the esophagus, there are 2 sphincters. And a sphincter is just a circular muscle that controls an opening. There is the one in your outline is the cardiac sphincter, which is also called the lower esophageal sphincter. And this is located where the esophagus meets the stomach, right here. So both the pharynx and the esophagus have the same functions. And there's a spot to list them in your outline. They serve as, main thing they do is serve as a passageway for food by connecting the mouth to the stomach. And the second thing is they participate in swallowing. And then I do have something here just so you guys know what they do not do. They don't secrete any digestive enzymes. There is no absorption that happens here. So if we look at that little checklist of the digestive processes, there is really just one thing happening here: propulsion, which is moving food through. And that is deglutition, swallowing, and peristalsis. Remember, we talked about that term, which is the just the contractions that are constantly moving food forward and down through the digestive tract. Okay, let me go through, I'll go through deglutition, which I've mentioned a couple times. It's this term here. And I said it's a fancy word for swallowing. That's like the scientific term for swallowing. So we'll talk about that, and then we can get into some of the other digestive organs quickly. I was hoping to be done around 11, so I don't keep you guys too long. All right, so the process of deglutition is initiated in the mouth when you have like a solid ball of food in the mouth, and then it continues through the pharynx and the esophagus. So there's two phases. We start with the buccal phase, and then there's the pharyngeal esophageal phase. The first phase, the buccal phase, is the voluntary phase that occurs in the mouth. Okay, and when I say that it's voluntary, I mean that you, the individual, chooses to initiate that process. So you control the muscles that initiate swallowing. And at this point, after you've kind of chewed food, you have a solid ball of food, which is called a bolus. And that term is used in your study outline. So at this point, the bolus moves from the mouth just back into the oropharynx. That's all that happens during the buccal phase. And then we have the second phase, pharyngeal esophageal phase, which is named after the two parts of the digestive tract that food is now moving into. Know that this is an involuntary phase that pushes food through the pharynx and the esophagus. Okay, so now food is going from the oropharynx down through the rest of the pharynx and then into the esophagus. And if you guys look in your outline, I have listed a few things that happen during this phase. Respiration is momentarily inhibited when food enters the pharynx, because if you have this solid ball of food in your pharynx, you can't at the same time have air moving through the pharynx too. Also, the tongue will raise up. If you guys look at this picture, see how the tongue is lifted? The tongue raises to block off the mouth so that food can't just move right back up into the oral cavity where it came from. Also, remember that the soft palate and the uvula raise up to close off the nasopharynx and the nasal cavity, so that prevents food from going up in that direction. And then finally, you can also see here that the epiglottis folds over to close off the larynx and the trachea. So basically, by blocking off all of those other openings, you're blocking off the opening to the larynx, you're blocking off the oral cavity, you're blocking off the nasal cavity. There is only one place left for this food to go, and that is down into the esophagus. Okay, so all of that happens to ensure that food or liquid, if that's what you're swallowing, goes into the proper tube. All right, so those are that is the process of deglutition. And this just shows you the rest of it, that bolus now moving through the esophagus and finally down into the stomach. Okay, so here is what the stomach looks like. It is a curved organ. It's located on the left side of the abdominal cavity. I'll go through the regions of the stomach, and then actually I don't need to do the chart that's on the next page, because that is filled in for you on the web page that I have in D2L. So I have that exact chart all filled in. You can just copy it right from there. So regarding the stomach, there are 4 main regions that are pictured here. So first of all, you have the cardia. The cardia is right here. It surrounds the opening of the esophagus into the stomach. So it's that very first section, right where the esophagus meets the stomach. And then next is the fundus, which is the rounded superior portion of the stomach. Then the body here, which is the large central portion. And the pylorus, which is the inferior region. So all the way at the bottom, where the stomach connects to the duodenum, right here. Okay, and as far as the sphincters go, there is one at the opening of the stomach and one at the exit of the stomach. The one up here we already talked about with the esophagus. It's called the cardiac sphincter. And as we said before, it's right where the esophagus connects to the stomach. So that's up here. At the bottom of the stomach, or near like where food is exiting, is the pyloric sphincter. This is where the stomach connects to the duodenum, which is the small intestine. That's the first segment of the small intestine. Just to show you guys, because it's just kind of interesting to see what the inside of the stomach really looks like. This is an actual stomach that's been cut open and spread apart. So you can see what it looks like on the inside. And remember, the inner lining of the entire digestive tract, including the stomach, is called the mucosa. And the mucosa of the stomach is highly folded. The name for those folds is rugae. So you can really see all of those folds here in this picture of the stomach. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna skip that next section. You guys see the chart. Oh, you can't really see chart. Oh, this background is really helping. But the chart is the one that lists the various cells that are found in the stomach mucosa, what they secrete, and what that secretion does. And that chart is all filled out for you in the web page that I created and put in D2L. So use that to fill in the chart. It'll be very helpful. Here is our checklist for digestive processes that occur in the stomach. And there are several of them that do. No ingestion, remember that only happens in the mouth. But there is propulsion that actually happens all the way through the digestive tract. So that is going to be checked off in every section. You have peristalsis, those contractions, all the way through in every section of the digestive tract. There is mechanical breakdown because we have contractions of the muscle layer in the stomach that helps to kind of mix food and move it around. There is chemical digestion that happens in the stomach because there are enzymes that are secreted and start to break down nutrients. And there is not much, but there is a very, very small amount of absorption. And defecation is not happening there. Okay. Let me see. So I will talk about this next section because this is actually one of the only parts of physiology that we actually do have in the digestive system. Most of what you're learning is just anatomy and kind of learning the different parts of these structures and maybe what enzymes or secretions they secrete and what they do, but there's not a whole lot of physiology here. So because this is one of the main physiological pieces, I will cover this. Let me go to this picture. All right. So this is talking about, and this diagram is trying to illustrate how the secretion of gastric juice is regulated. So gastric juice is the term that we use to refer to just all of the secretions that are produced by the gastric glands in the stomach. Gastric juice is very acidic because if you go back to the chart, hydrochloric acid is one of the secretions of the stomach. That is a very strong acid. So gastric juice is very acidic. There is about 3 liters of gastric juice secreted daily, which is kind of a lot. If you picture like a 2-liter bottle of soda, it's 1.5 of those. So that's a lot. And there are 3 phases, which you can see here in the different colors. So one in blue, one in green, one in orange. 3 phases that regulate the secretion of gastric juice. Starting with the cephalic phase. This begins when you see or smell or even think about eating food. So at this point, there is no food in your stomach. You are just thinking about eating. So as far as stimulation goes, what you can fill in here is that the vagus nerve. So just to remind you guys, the vagus nerve, it's spelled right here, but I don't know if you can see that, vagus. The vagus nerve is one of your cranial nerves. So it extends from the base of the brain and it goes all the way down into the digestive tract. Okay, so the vagus nerve stimulates the gastric glands to prepare for upcoming digestion. Okay, so that's it for the cephalic phase. Basically, when you start thinking about eating, even if you haven't eaten yet, your body is preparing to receive food in the digestive tract. So even then, you're going to start secreting gastric juice just in preparation for eating, because your body thinks that you're about to start eating if you're thinking about it. Okay, so next is the gastric phase. And this occurs once food actually enters the stomach. So what stimulates? So under stimulation, this is what stimulates secretion of the gastric juice. There are several things. There are stretch receptors in the stomach, and they are stimulated when food enters the stomach. Because when food enters the stomach stretches, it expands. So that is detected by these receptors. Also, there are chemoreceptors. These monitor the pH in the stomach. And they are stimulated when the pH increases due to food entering the stomach. Okay, so normally, remember I said the pH of the stomach is very acidic. When food enters the stomach, the food that we're eating is not as acidic. I mean, some of it does tend to be acidic, but it is not nearly as acidic as the gastric juice that's in the stomach. So no matter what you eat, the food that you eat is going to have a higher pH than the pH of the stomach normally. When that food enters the stomach, it's going to increase the pH, and that will be detected by these chemoreceptors. So whenever either one, or usually it's both at the same time, of these receptors get stimulated, they activate cells in the stomach to secrete gastrin. Gastrin is a hormone that stimulates the release of digestive enzymes and acid.
Can you say it again, please, about the gastrin?
Yeah, it stimulates the release of digestive enzymes and acid. Okay, so that's how your stomach knows that food has entered the stomach, because you'll have stretching and you'll have a change to the pH of the stomach. So whenever either one or both of those things is detected, it causes the release of gastrin, which causes the secretion of digestive enzymes. Okay, so that's important because you need to know to release these digestive enzymes if there's food in the stomach, because that's really the only way that this food is going to get digested chemically. On the other hand, if you don't have food in the stomach, or if food, enters the stomach and then eventually it's going to leave the stomach and go into the next part of the digestive tract, you need to stop secreting gastric juice. You don't need it anymore. So that's the inhibition section. If there is an acidic pH, so if the pH of the stomach starts to go down, down, down and get more acidic, what is that indicating about food in the stomach?
That it was acidic.
Or, well, the food that we eat, so I know what you're thinking, but the food that we eat is never going to be that acidic.
So it's not the stomach is not doing their job properly.
It wouldn't necessarily mean that.
Is there less food in the stomach?
Right. Yeah. Because normally, if you think about it, normally the pH of the stomach is like a 2. It is very acidic because of all the hydrochloric acid that's in there. No matter what type of food we're eating, we are never eating food that is that acidic. The foods that we eat, some tend to be acidic, but maybe like a 6 on the pH scale, never a 2. So if the pH starts getting lower and lower, that would be an indication that now the food that once entered the stomach is now leaving. So if we detect that there is now an acidic pH, what you can add there is that that's going to indicate that the stomach is now empty. There's no longer food in the stomach. So that's one thing that would cause inhibition of gastric juice. If there's no longer food in the stomach, you don't need to keep secreting gastric juice anymore. There's no food there, so there's no need for it. There is one other thing that would inhibit the secretion of gastric juice. And this would happen even if you have food in the stomach. And that is if the sympathetic nervous system is activated. So I'm going back again to A&P1 when you learned about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Does anyone remember the term that we use to refer to the sympathetic division? It's also known as the what? Anyone know?
Fly and something. Firefly, something like that.
Yeah, you're on the right track. So fight or flight. Yeah, I think that's what you were thinking. That
was it.
Yeah. Sympathetic division is known as the fight or flight division. So whenever you're in like an emergency, exciting situation, your body typically responds by like fighting or fleeing, running away. But in either case, I always say it's like the E situations: excitement, emergency, exercise, and in those situations, your body is going to put aside anything else it was doing, like digesting food, so that it can put all of its energy toward either fighting or fleeing, like towards that emergency situation. So basically, what you can fill in here is that any fight or flight situation will override gastric secretion. Okay, so even if you're in the middle of digesting food, you have a ton of food in the stomach, and you were actively secreting gastric juice to help with its digestion. Even if that's the case, if you are faced with a fight or flight situation and your sympathetic nervous system takes over, it is going to inhibit that. And once the situation has passed, it will pick up again. But just temporarily, the sympathetic division can override everything else that is happening in the body, because it just wants to basically, you want to save all your energy towards, doing what you need to do for that fight or flight situation. Okay, so that's the gastric phase, and I'm almost done. We have the third phase, which is called the intestinal phase. And this occurs when food, and at this point, I have used the term chyme. If you are looking in the study outline, previously in the outline, which I didn't mention yet, I defined what the term chyme is, but because I'm using it now, I just want to let you know really quickly, the term chyme that I have here, CHYME, refers to food that is now in its liquid form, because now food has been chewed up and now mixed with gastric juice and saliva. So now it's actually like liquefied. So chyme is the term for the food once it has been mixed with your various secretions and now it's liquefied. So during the intestinal phase, this is when the chyme now has exited the stomach and it enters the small intestine. So that's why this third phase is called the intestinal phase, because that is now where food is located. All right, so for stimulation, there are stretch receptors. Remember, we said there are stretch receptors in the stomach. There are also stretch receptors in the small intestine. So these stretch receptors are stimulated when chyme enters the small intestine. Okay, and the presence of chyme in the small intestine triggers the release of hormones. And I'll mention what those hormones are in just a second. And it also triggers what's called the enterogastric reflex. And I'm about to explain that too. All of these things, this enterogastric reflex and all of those three hormones, they all inhibit gastric activities. They slow down and inhibit gastric activities. And that should make sense, right? Because now that the chyme has entered the small intestine, it's no longer in the stomach. So you no longer need to secrete gastric juice in the stomach. There's not food in there anymore. So the things that are actually inhibiting gastric secretion are the things that I just mentioned. It's the enterogastric reflex and several hormones. So that enterogastric reflex, what you can fill in here for the definition is that it involves neurons from the small intestine that signal the stomach. So they connect to the stomach and they inhibit secretion and gastric motility, which just means movement or contractions in the stomach. Okay, so again, this reflex just involves neurons connecting from the small intestine to the stomach. And they just tell the stomach to stop secreting and to essentially stop contracting. Because at this point, there's no food in the stomach anymore. So that's not necessary. Okay, and one more thing, there are also 3 hormones that do the exact same thing. These also inhibit gastric juice secretion. And all you need to know are the names of the hormones because they all do the same thing. They are called gastric inhibitory peptide. So these are listed in your outline too. Secretin and cholecystokinin. And all 3 hormones do the same thing. They are inhibiting the secretion of gastric juice now that food is in the small intestine and no longer in the stomach.
Can you repeat that name, please?
The last one is cholecystokinin. It's right in your outline too, if you need spelling. It is the 3rd one listed. Okay. So I am, again, not going to really do a lot of the anatomy stuff. I'll go through kind of quickly just so I can get to the last couple parts of the digestive system. So right after the stomach, and this is a pretty good picture, you can see the stomach and you can see that it connects to the small intestine here. Right after the stomach, you have the small intestine, and there are 3 sections, 3 like divisions of the small intestine. The duodenum is in purple, and it's like the first 10 to 12 inches. So it's maybe like a foot long at most. And then the area in blue is the jejunum. That's the middle section, which is probably about 3 feet. And then the final section is called the ileum, which is about 6 feet. So that is the biggest part. One type of modification that you have to the mucosa of the small intestine is villi. And on those villi are microvilli. So the term villi, and this is there's a little chart for both of these. The term villi refers to these finger-like projections of the mucosa. So it's these little things that stick out of the mucosa. And also important is why you have these and what they do. And you can add this right here in the chart too, if you're in the outline. These increase the surface area available for absorption. Okay, so we are in the small intestine right now, and this is the main location for nutrient absorption. Definitely know that. This is the main place where absorption occurs. So one thing, I'm going to leave this picture up. One thing that you can't really see on here, this shows you the villi, but there are also microvilli. They are microscopic. So you cannot see them just on these little diagrams, but microvilli are smaller projections on the top, the apical or the top surface of the villi. Okay, so basically these are like little villi on the villi. So it's even more little projections. And that just increases the surface area even more. So having these villi and the microvilli on those increase the surface area and make absorption much easier and quicker, because you have such a large area over which it can happen. For that other chart that is in your outline that has the cells listed and then their function, I'm not going to go through that because just like with the other one, I have it in the web page all filled in for you. So no need for me to talk about it and waste time now because you have all of that information if you check out the web page. So I'm going to skip that section. Let's go right to the little checklist. You have everything happening here except ingestion, because that only happens in the mouth. Defecation, that only happens at the end of the large intestine. But you do have everything else. You have propulsion, which happens everywhere. Mechanical breakdown, that's the physical breaking apart of food molecules. That's happening here. You have chemical digestion. This is where a lot of the chemical digestion happens. There are a lot of enzymes that get secreted here. And remember I said this is where almost all of your nutrient absorption happens. So that is definitely happening. Okay. The next two things are accessory structures. So it's actually three things: the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. And just remember what I said about accessory structures. They're part of the digestive system, but food does not actually enter them. So you will never have food like traveling through the liver or the gallbladder or the pancreas, but they all contribute to digestion in some way. The pancreas is super important because it secretes a ton of digestive enzymes. If we look at the histology of the pancreas, this is the very first section under the pancreas. There are two main types of cells within the pancreas. The pancreatic islets are the endocrine portion of the organ. So that means that these cells secrete hormones. Does anyone know? There are actually four, but there's one big one. What's a major hormone that gets secreted by the pancreas?
Glucagon.
That is one of that. That actually wasn't the one I was thinking of, but you're absolutely right. Glucagon is one. And there's a hormone that does the exact opposite of glucagon.
Glucagon.
No.
Insulin then.
Yes, insulin.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. So very good. Those are the two hormones that are involved in regulating your blood glucose, your blood sugar levels. So yeah, that's what these endocrine cells do. They secrete insulin and glucagon to regulate blood sugar. But that doesn't really have to do with digestion. The part of the pancreas that has to do with digestion is it's the acini cells. And these are the exocrine portion of the pancreas. These are the cells that secrete enzymes. And these enzymes break down all different kinds of nutrients. There are many enzymes that get secreted. All right. So what I don't think I have this next chart in any of the web pages. So I will help you guys fill this one in because it goes through all of the enzymes of the pancreas, which are really important. And then I think I will stop there because we will have covered almost all of the major stuff. So that chart, you guys can see the chart in that outline if you're following along, which lists the enzymes and their function. So the carbohydrate digesting enzymes are, there's one, it's pancreatic amylase. Anything that's called an amylase breaks down carbohydrates. So its function is to break down starch, which is a large carbohydrate, into disaccharides and monosaccharides, which are smaller carbohydrates. So the monosaccharides are like the simple sugars. Those are the smallest carbohydrates. Okay, pancreatic lipase is a lipid digesting enzyme. And the main lipid, and lipids are fats. So the main lipid or fat that is in our diet is triglycerides. And let me see if you guys, do you feel like you need spelling for these things? Because I can pull up another PowerPoint that has these in them. Give me one sec. Oops. Not that. Okay. All right. So lipids. Here we go. The main type of lipid in our diet is triglycerides. So pancreatic lipase will break triglycerides into, so here are the main components of a triglyceride: glycerol and fatty acids right here. Okay, so these enzymes are just breaking the initial large molecule, whether it's a carbohydrate, a lipid, a protein, or a nucleic acid, into its smaller components. So for triglycerides, its smaller, its basic components that it's made out of are glycerol and fatty acid. Okay, the nucleic acid digesting enzymes. Remember, nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. So there's deoxyribonuclease, and that breaks DNA down into So the building blocks of DNA and RNA are nucleotides. So it breaks DNA into nucleotides. The other nucleic acid digesting enzyme is ribonuclease. So that one breaks down RNA into the same building blocks, because DNA and RNA are both made of nucleotides. Okay. And the last group, there are several of these, the protein digesting enzymes. So there's 3 different ones. And one note that I have here in your outline is that all of these protein digesting enzymes they get secreted in their inactive form. And they are only activated once they enter the small intestine, which is where they perform digestion. Otherwise, if they were active or if they were activated as soon as they were created in the pancreas, they would actually digest the pancreatic cells. They would digest the cell that created it, because they are so strong. They would literally break down the actual pancreas. So they are created in an inactive form and secreted in their inactive form. And they are only activated as soon as they enter the small intestine, because the small intestine, and actually anywhere in the digestive tract, there is a thick mucus layer secreted by the mucosa, which protects the tissue of the digestive tract. It protects the mucosa so that it can't be digested. Okay, so just know that these protein digesting enzymes are so powerful that they would literally digest the cell that secretes them if they were not secreted in an inactive form. Okay, so we have trypsinogen. So I've had to list the inactive form and then the name of the enzyme, which just changes a little bit once it gets activated, because there's like 2 versions of these enzymes, the inactivated version and the activated version. It's almost the same name. You have trypsinogen, which becomes trypsin. And you have chymotrypsinogen, which becomes chymotrypsin. And they both do the exact same thing. They both break down proteins into peptides. Okay, before I keep going, let me explain just really quickly the difference between a protein and a peptide. So no matter what, either one you look at, they are made of individual amino acids. When you look at this diagram, all of the gray circles that you're seeing are amino acids. So when you take several amino acids and you build them, you put them in a sequence and you connect them, that creates proteins and peptides. A peptide is a smaller protein, usually less than 50 amino acids, and a protein is very large. It is more than 50 amino acids. So these first 2 protein digesting enzymes break really large proteins into smaller peptides. So you're taking a really big chain of amino acids and you're breaking it down into smaller chains of amino acids. Okay, and then the last one, procarboxypeptidase, it gets activated to become carboxypeptidase. And that will take all of these peptides that you now have. So it will break down peptides into amino acids. Okay, so first you have a couple of enzymes that take the big proteins and chop them up into smaller chains of amino acids. And then you have this third enzyme that comes in and takes those smaller chains and then breaks them apart into their individual building blocks, which are the amino acids. All right, so that covers all of the enzymes secreted by the pancreas. And remember, food never goes into the pancreas because it's not part of the digestive tract. So all of these enzymes get secreted into the small intestine, which is where food is located. So that is where all of these enzymes actually do their job. The only parts that I'm not really getting to, and that's okay because there's really not a lot of physiology at all associated with them, is the two other accessory organs. So we have the liver and the gallbladder. There's just 1 or 2 pages associated with them, really related to digestion. The main function is just the production and the storage of bile. And bile helps with the digestion of lipids. It's not involved in digesting any other molecule other than lipids. And after that, the only other thing here is the large intestine. And that is mostly just anatomy, like identifying the different parts of the large intestine. And then just knowing that the digestive processes that occur in the large intestine. And really, there's not a lot. By the time food gets to the large intestine, you've had almost all nutrient absorption, because remember that happens in the small intestine. So the main thing that happens in the large intestine is a whole lot of water absorption. Because remember, you have chyme, which is the liquefied food that you have going through the small intestine. So that enters the large intestine. But by the time it reaches the end of the large intestine, it is now a solid because of all the water that gets absorbed from it. So in the large intestine, you have a lot of water absorption, and along with the water, you do also absorb some vitamins too. So really that's the main thing that happens in the large intestine. And then defecation happens there. That's the only place where defecation occurs, which is the expulsion of any undigested food and waste products. And that is really it for your outline. So we were able to cover a lot in this session, because a lot of this stuff is covered in the web pages. So make sure you check those out for those charts that I was referring to. In terms of your test on Unit 3, I believe, I was looking at it this morning, and you do have the test review, which gives you some details, but I believe there's 80 questions. I do know that the first 9 have to do with just that general chemistry review section. So it might ask you about the types of reactions and the different types of organic molecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and what their building blocks are. So for example, the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. And that's just the first 9 questions. So everything else has to do with the digestive system and structures and physiology. I know that there are, and this is in the review, but there are 1 or 2 matching sections. And I think there's a diagram, but again, that will be in the test review that I have posted. So those are really all my tips for the exam. Do you guys have any questions for me at all about the content that we covered today or about the exam? All right. Well, if not, then I'm going to stop.